What would you do if you heard your child's laugh in the woods but they were right beside you? The late afternoon sun filtered through the canopy of sprawling oaks lining the quiet suburban street, dappling the sidewalk and houses in shifting shadows. Emma stood near the rust-speckled chain-link fence that enclosed the school's playground, her posture tense yet watchful. Her long brown hair was loosely pulled back, and the earthy tones of her jacket blended almost seamlessly into the backdrop of autumn's dying foliage. Around her, a dozen other parents mingled, their voices bubbling with light-hearted gossip while their children dashed between swings and slides. The air was crisp, with a faint scent of damp earth and decaying leaves and autumnal breath that seemed to carry whispers of secrets just beyond sight. A sharp laugh pierced the soft murmur as one father shook his head toward Emma. "There's Emma, always watching every move," he said, voice edged with a half-smile but a clear undertone of ridicule. Another parent nodded in agreement. "Honestly, don't you think you're a little over the top? I mean, how protective can one mom get? You've got to let them live a little." Emma's eyes flickered toward the speaker, a woman with bright lipstick and brazen confidence, her words sharp and slicing through the afternoon haze like brittle ice. A flush crept up Emma's neck, warm against the chill, igniting a familiar shame that sank deep beneath her ribs. "But what if something happens?" Emma's voice was low, hesitant but firm. "I just want to keep my kids safe." A derisive snort followed. "Safe? That's just an excuse to control everything. Kids need freedom, Emma. You're just living in fear." Their laughter blended with the rustling leaves, a chorus of judgment that pressed in around her, shrinking the world to a chilly echo chamber of doubt. Emma clenched her jaw, fighting the urge to retreat into the comforting silence of her thoughts, but the biting sting of exclusion was unrelenting. Her gaze dropped to the ground, where a muddy footprint smeared the cracked concretean indelible mark, much like the one now etched into her spirit. A distant child's laugh rang out, sweet and bright, threading innocence through the gray undertones of the moment. Yet the laughter felt distant, fractured, as if layered with a shadow that only she sensed, a warning whispered between joy and fear. She looked back up, catching the shimmer of a worn stuffed toy caught in the fence, its threadbare fur twisted and faded. It was a forgotten sentinel, a symbol of lost childhood and fractured security, mirroring the fragile vulnerability she hid beneath her calm exterior. Emma stepped back from the fence, the scattered leaves crunching softly underfoot, a tactile reminder of the fragile boundary between safety and the lurking unknown. Her breath hung visible in the cold air, shallow and quick, as the mother's gaze hardened slightly, a glimmer of fiercely protective resolve beneath the veil of vulnerability. Around her, the playground's mundane rhythm continued, oblivious to the silent struggle, the whispered fears cloaked beneath the ordinary. The parents' voices rose again, tipping into casual mockery, while Emma's eyes traced the outline of the dark woods encircling the town, a living shadow, ancient and unknowable, where secrets festered beyond the reach of sunlight. The children's voices mingled with the rustle of the tree's skeletal branches, and beneath it all, a solitary, chilling laughter echoed, a child's laughing voice carrying a note of innocence twisted by something darker, sending a shiver down Emma's spine. Her child's hand slid into hers, warm and real, grounding her in an instant of fierce protection. Emma swallowed hard, her breath steadying. Despite the doubts, the isolation, and the laughter that stung, the embers of maternal courage glowed knowingly deep within. And in the gathering dusk, as shadows lengthened and the woods whispered their secrets, Emma stood firm, a silent guardian ready to face the darkness that hid beneath the everyday. The scene held its breath in a suspended tension, the ordinary masking an undercurrent of deeper truths yet to surface. The evening air bore a chill that seeped through Emma's layered clothes as she pulled her jacket tighter around her slender frame. Around her, the quiet small town resumed its sleepy rhythm, but for Emma, the day's accusations still echoed, sharp shards of ridicule that had settled like stones in her chest. She lingered beside the worn wooden bench overlooking the sun-dappled park, the shadows growing longer, draping her in muted hues of twilight and doubt. Her breath rose in soft plumes, mingling with the mist that began to weave through the underbrush, blurring the edges between familiar and unknown. The laughter of children playing somewhere distant threaded through the trees, innocent, yet now tinged with an unsettling undertone that gnawed at the corners of her resolve. She cradled her folded arms against herself, eyes fixed on the dense line of woods arching their gnarled limbs against the sinking Suna fortress of mystery cloaked in twilight shadows where truths lurked unseen. The forest was a place she knew well, yet its depths now seemed menacingly alien, a dark expanse where uncertainty stretched beyond control. The weight of isolation pressed down, each breath a sluggish effort. Inside, a tempest-brewed self-doubt flared, veiled anger simmered beneath the surface, and primordial fear intertwined with a fierce maternal instinct that refused to be extinguished. The sting of rejection gnawed at her pride, but beneath it, a subtle ember glimmeried, an ember that whispered of strength scarred but not shattered. Emma's gaze fell upon a small, well-worn stuffed bear resting on the ground beside the bench, half hidden by fallen leaves. Its fabric was faded and frayed, a silent witness to childhood innocence and the precariousness of safety. Reaching down, she cradled it gently, the familiar softness offering a fleeting balm to the raw edges of her spirit. The murmurs of passing footsteps faded in and out, the distant chime of a church bell marking the hour, each sound stretching time in slow, cruel beats. The hushed voices of neighbors carried faintly across the night air, carrying whispered judgments that wrapped themselves around her like a suffocating shroud. A distant flicker of movement caught her eye, a shadow weaving between the tree trunks, swift and barely discernible. She blinked, heart-lurching, but the figure melted into the undergrowth, leaving only questions that deepened the shadows in her mind. A soft, chilling laugh drifted from the woods, a child's laughter echoing with duality, joy and something more elusive, more sinister. The sound sent an involuntary shiver down Emma's spine, stirring protective instincts that pulsed beneath the veil of fear. She rose slowly, clutching the stuffed bear to her chest like a talisman against the encroaching unknown. The path home seemed longer now, winding and uncertain beneath the growing darkness, the boundary between safety and silence fragile and blurred. Her mind raced, echoing the warnings, the dismissals, the tightening grip of strangers' skepticism. Was I wrong? A whisper on the cold wind, layered with defiance. With a shaky breath, Emma squared her shoulders, the tension coiling taut in her limbs but refusing to break. The woods loomed dark and silent beyond the quiet streetlights, and somewhere within, the secrets waited, as patient and implacable as time itself. The night wrapped its muted cloak around her, the faint light from a distant porch casting fragile beams through the trees, a dim promise that somewhere beyond the shadows, her path awaited. Emma's eyes flickered with a flicker of unyielding resolve, the protective embers of a mother's fierce love and a heart unwilling to surrender. The scene held its breath on the cusp of uncertainty, as the woods whispered and the silent night pulsed with hidden life. The night crept over the small town like a whispered secret, the dense forest borders around their campsite deepening into shadows that seemed to pulse with unseen life. Emma's fingers tightened around the worn fabric of the stuffed bear, her child clutched a token from days now tinged with fading security, and she drew a slow breath, the tapestry of familiar woodland scentspine, damp earth, moss clinging to the cool, heavy air. The crackling fire was a solitary heartbeat in the vast dark, casting flickering golden light that danced across Emma's resolute yet weary face. Her eyes, luminous in the firelight, darted between the encircling trees and her peacefully sleeping children, the faint rise and fall of their chests a fragile rhythm she ached to preserve. Suddenly, a second, distant child's laugh shattered the silence, a sound both innocent and eerie, carried like a ghostly melody from the shadowed woods. Emma's body stiffened. The laughter echoed a chilling duality, joy folded into menace. Her breath caught, heart lurching as the glow from the campfire wavered, the crisp air thick with unspoken dread. Her gaze swept to where her own child's gentle breathing promised safety, yet that haunting laughter teased the edges of sanity, a cruel gesture at the gate of her mind. Emma rose quietly, the soft rustle of dried leaves underfoot blending with the distant whisper of the woods, as if the trees themselves were exhaling secrets long concealed. The stuffed bear slipped from her trembling hand, landing with a lonely thud on the forest floor, marking a boundary crossed into unknown territory. She moved cautiously to the edge of the firelight, the woods stretching out in endless blackened tendrils. The familiar shapes surrendered to shadows, hiding mysteries deeper and darker than the night sky above. Each step was measured, a silent prayer threading through the chill, to shield, to protect, to understand what lurked beyond the comforting veil of childhood innocence. A subtle rustling nearby drew her attention, leaves brushing softly like whispered warnings. Emma's eyes narrowed, scanning the labyrinth of branches and trunks, seeking the intangible, the unreal. The woods seemed alive, watching, waiting, its silence pregnant with riddles and unspoken threats. Her mind whirled, doubts flared, but beneath them, an ember of ironclad defiance took hold. Her protective instincts, once dismissed and mocked, surged with fresh, desperate vitality. Fear no longer paralyzed but sharpened her senses, wove a fierce armor over her doubts. The flutter of fabric caught on a low branch of familiar fragment, something belonging to her own world, a thread connecting the known to the unknown. She reached out, fingers brushing a worn piece of cloth, her pulse quickening. Returning to the fire's warmth, Emma gathered the stuffed bear, now a symbol not only of lost innocence but of the unbreakable tether binding her to her child, to the perilous mystery unfolding. She knelt beside the sleeping children, eyes tracing their delicate features, her whispered vow as soft and resolute as the night around them: "I will keep you safe, no matter what hides in the shadows." As the night deepened, the forest's breath mingled with hers, a silent companion in the dark. The second laugh echoed faintly, once more a haunting lullaby laced with forewarning, but Emma's gaze remained unflinching, fueled by a reluctant acceptance and an emerging determination. The camera pulled back, the firelight flickering fragile against the consuming darkness, framing Emma as both guardian and seeker in a perilous world veiled by shadow and fear. The woods whispered their secrets, and she listened, no longer a woman dismissed but a mother awakened, standing at the threshold of a haunting, uncertain journey. The morning light sifted through the thick canopy of ancient trees, cutting the dense fog into mottled patterns on the leaf-strewn ground. Emma stepped carefully over twisted roots and mossy stones, her breath rising in soft clouds that mingled with the cool air, dense with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The forest around her seemed vast and unknowable, a living, breathing entity cloaked in shadows both inviting and threatening. Her heart thudded, a steady drum of both fear and determination, as she traced the faint footprints winding off the narrow trail. The prints were small, childlike, an unsettling reminder of the vulnerability that had ignited her protective instincts just days before. Yet, in the harsh light of day, the woods felt less sinister, the terrain more familiar, as if nature herself offered fragile refuge against the darkness lurking beyond. Her fingers brushed the cuff of her earthy-toned jacket, grounding her as she slowed, listening. The chirp of distant birds wove a melodic pattern, punctuated by the rustle of unseen creatures in the underbrush. Every sound was amplified in her senses, a crack, a whisper of movement, a distant snap of a twig setting her nerves alight. Emma knelt beside a moss-covered rock, eyes narrowing on a hastily abandoned stuffed toy partially buried beneath the fallen leaves. Its fabric was faded, its stitches frayed, a mute symbol of lost security, echoing the fractured innocence she was desperate to protect. She touched it gently, the softness a balm against the sharp chill coiling in her stomach. Suddenly, a voice cracked the forest's calm, her child's name, spoken with a note of urgency. Emma's pulse accelerated, adrenaline thrumming in her veins as she called back softly, "I'm right here. You're safe." The voice answered again, near yet elusive, blending with the dappled shadows and beckoning her deeper into the woods. Doubt flickered, but the urge to shield and reunite drove her forward. The journey was fraught with uncertainty, the boundary between vigilance and paranoia thin and wavering, but Emma pressed on. She paused at a fork in the winding path, two trails veiled in thick underbrush and filtered sunlight. The decision weighed heavily her instincts, a tangle of hope and dread. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the silence pressing. A sudden laugh, light and clear but too close and yet impossibly distant, stirred every hair on the back of her neck. It was the laugh of a child, innocent, joyous yet twisted by an unplaceable edge of fear. Emma's gaze searched the shadows, heart pounding fiercely. Her voice was merely a whisper, laced with raw resolve. "Where are you?" The question floated into the forest, unanswered, lingering like a thorn of uncertainty. As the light slipped away beneath gathering clouds, Emma stood rooted, a solitary figure poised at the threshold between the known and the hidden. The woods awaited, dark and inscrutable, secrets nestled in their embrace. The scene closed on her watchful eyes, fierce and unyielding, as a faint rustling of leaves whispered a warning, and the heavy silence was broken by the softest echo of that haunting second laugh. The forest's secrets remained veiled, challenging her courage and mystery wrapped in shadows that only she could face. The cool light of a late autumn day filtered weakly through thinning clouds as Emma moved cautiously along the familiar dirt path that skirted the edge of the woods. Her boots crunched softly on the fallen leaves, each step echoing her determination mingled with an ever-deepening anxiety. Daylight offered a hollow comfort. The forest around her still seemed to breathe with secrets she'd yet to unravel, shadows folding within shadows. She knelt beside a patch of disturbed earth, brushing away damp leaves to expose a faint imprint, a child's footprint, washed partially by recent rain but undeniable. Her heart pounded harshly, each beat a reminder that her fears were no longer confined to mere shadows. These were real signs, tangible manifestations of the unknown that hovered too close. A sudden rustle in the underbrush snapped her eyes up, her breath catching in her throat. The woods whispered with unseen movement, alive with secret watchers. She swallowed hard and pushed on, the protective instinct tightening its grip on her mind and body. Returning home, Emma found the atmosphere around her charged with tension. Her partner, Tom, stood by the window, face etched with concern and frustration. The distance between them was like an unbridgeable chasm carved by doubt. "Emma, you have to see reason." Tom's voice was low, the edge weary yet sharp. "These footprints. Maybe you're reading too much into it. We're safe here. You're letting fear control you." Emma's eyes flashed with a fierce tremor of resolve. "I can't ignore what's outside our door, Tom. Something's wrong. I know it." He shook his head, retreating further into disbelief, their conversations fracturing into silent standoffs and unspoken accusations. That night, Emma lay awake, the dark room pressing down, the shadows on the ceiling contorting into shapes she couldn't name. The stuffed bear from the camping trip sat on the edge of her bed, its threadbare fur and faded button eyes a small but haunting talisman of vulnerability and lost innocence. Her shaking fingers reached out and grasped it, a tether to the love she fought to protect. Days blurred in a restless cycle. Emma's investigations led her back into the woods each morning, following whispers and fleeting clues, scattered feathers caught on brambles, an old, scratched pendant glinting beneath a tangle of moss, the eerie echo of a child's laugh brushing the edges of her hearing. She pieced together fragments of a puzzle no one else seemed to acknowledge. With each revelation, her isolation grew, the gulf with Tom widening as he questioned her grip on reality. One evening, arriving home from a fruitless search, she found him waiting by the door, arms crossed, eyes dark with worry and exasperation. "Emma, this obsession is tearing us apart. You're losing yourself." Her voice broke but carried a newfound steel. "I'm fighting for us, for our family. You may doubt me, but I won't stop." That night, the wind whipped sharply against the windows, wind moaning like a distant lament. Emma sat alone in the dim kitchen, the only light the flickering flame of a single candle. Her thoughts churned, an ache undiminished by the physical blaze. A folded scrap of paper lay beside Hera's hastily scrawled note discovered amid the woods, bearing a cryptic symbol she'd never seen before. Her pulse raced as she traced the lines, the knowledge that the forest held more than she dared admit settling deep inside. Before dawn, a sudden, unmistakable noise shattered the fragile calm, a series of soft footsteps crunching near her home, unfamiliar and deliberate. Emma froze, her breath caught and held tight. She reached for the door, hands trembling, as realization slithered cold across her skin. Someone or something was out there, watching. The candle guttered, risking an extinguish as the shadows seemed to stretch further into the room. Outside, the woods remained silent, holding their secrets close in the dark. Emma stood at the window, eyes scanning the abyss, the impossibility of retreat dawning heavy and complete. And somewhere deep within, the faint echo of a second child's laugh trembled, both promise and peril intertwined. Thus the unseen threat edged ever closer into her life. The forest seemed to close in around Emma, the daylight dimming as dense clouds gathered overhead, casting dull, mottled shadows that clung desperately to the undergrowth. She knelt beside a moss-covered root, brushing away damp leaves to reveal a glint of something half-buried beneath the soil. Her fingers trembled as she unearthed it, a small, rusted locket she hadn't seen in years. The cold metal pressed against her palm, heavy with memories she thought she'd buried deep. Recognition flooded her in a dizzying rush. This locket, once worn by her as a child, was a talisman of safety and innocence now marred by time and distance. It was a tangible fragment of a past she desperately wanted to lay to rest, but which now clawed back with renewed ferocity. Her breath caught as a sudden, chilling breeze swept through the trees, rustling the leaves like whispered warnings from the depths of the woods. It was then she heard it, the faintest echo of a child's laughter, soft and distant but achingly clear. A laugh like the one that had haunted her since the camping trip. The sound sent a jolt through her, a sharpened reminder that the woods held more secrets than daylight could dispel. Emma stood slowly, clutching the worn toy she'd retrieved, a tattered stuffed bear missing one eye, its stuffing spilling forth a fragment of her child's lost security and her own unraveling peace. The bear embodied the fragile innocence that hung in the balance between safety and the unknown terror lurking in the shadows. The weight of the discovery pressed heavily against her chest, the decades-old memories intertwining with present fears. She realized, with a shattering clarity, that this was not the first time she had faced this silent adversary. The woods harbored a dark history, one that had touched her life before but which she had tried, desperately, to forget. The locket had been a gift from her mother, a symbol of love and protection, now a bitter reminder that even the closest bonds could fail against the silent menace that hid in the trees. The laughter echoed again, a haunting chorus threading through the rustling branches, blending innocence with menace. Emma's eyes filled with tears she fought to stem, the gravity of her fragmented past colliding with the inescapable present. "I've faced you before," she whispered to the unseen force, voice steady but raw with pain, "and I won't let you take them." The sky darkened further, thunder rumbling faintly in the distance as she turned back toward the trail, determined now beyond doubt but burdened by a loss deeper than words. The familiar path home was a fragile thread connecting her to everything she cherished, yet the shadow of the woods stretched unrelenting, a silent witness to promises made and broken. Her partner's skeptical gaze still echoed in her mind, the growing chasm between them widening as fear gnawed at their shared trust. Emma knew the road ahead would unravel everything: relationships, sanity, peace, yet her resolve hardened. In the gathering gloom, the woods whispered their ancient secrets, branches swaying like watchful sentinels. Emma wiped her tears with trembling hands, the locket and stuffed bear held tight, symbols of lost childhood and fierce maternal courage intertwined. The camera lingered on her face, a canvas of pain and fierce determination, as the forest's shadow swallowed the last light. In that suffocating dark, a whisper of hope stirred, a promise that the fight had only just begun. Night pressed heavily against the windows of Emma's house, the muted beat of rain a relentless rhythm on the rooftop. Inside, the rooms felt swallowed in shadows, the familiar warmth transformed into a cold expanse where every breath seemed weighed with desperation. The low hum of an old heater was the only sound still daring to resist the silence. Emma sat alone on the floor, her back against the peeling wallpaper, chilled by the dampness seeping in through unseen cracks. The dim glow of a flickering candle cast fragile light, its flame dancing tremulously as though uncertain it could persist in the thick gloom. Her fingers trembled, tracing the threadbare edges of her child's stuffed toy, its once brightly colored fabric faded and worn, a fragile remnant of security now fraying at the seams. Her eyes, wide and glassy, held a reflection of something broken, a kaleidoscope of fear, sorrow, and raw disillusionment. The second laugh that had first haunted her in the woods now echoed relentlessly in her mind, a chilling reminder of a reality she could neither escape nor fully comprehend. It was a sound both innocent and sinister, a cruel paradox that gnawed at the very fabric of her maternal peace. Outside, the storm's pulse quickened. Jagged flashes of lightning fractured the sky, illuminating the skeletal limbs of the surrounding forest. The thunder grumbled like an ominous herald, rolling through the town's outskirts and reverberating through Emma's bones. Each rumble was a tremor beneath her skin, a prelude to unraveling. She clutched the stuffed toy tighter, her knuckles whitening, as a wave of dread surged through her. The footprints she'd found near their home, the whispered doubts from her partner, the dismissive glances from friends, they all coalesced into a suffocating weight that threatened to crush her spirit. The world around her dimmed, the edges growing indistinct, blurred by a fog of despair. Her mind cycled through fragmented memories, the contentious school meeting, the ridicule that had stripped away her confidence, the moments of alarm and vulnerability in the woods when shadows seemed to whisper closer. The loss of certainty, the fracturing of trust, the isolation pressing in from every angle. "Where is the safety I promised them?" she murmured, voice cracked and brittle, swallowed immediately by the dense silence. The candle flickered wildly as a gust seeped through an unnoticed crack in the window, the fragile flame wavering like her fraying resolve. A distant child's laugh, haunting and disembodied, drifted faintly through the air just beyond reach, impossibly near. Her breath caught, heart pounding in wild staccato. The suffocating fear of what lurked unseen pressed like a weight on her chest, compressing the fragile core of hope she clung to. Emma's gaze dropped to the worn teddy bear, the symbol of lost innocence, now a silent witness to the shattering of her protective world. Her shoulders shook with the quiet release of grief, tears tracing silent trails down a face etched with exhaustion and resignation. The walls closed in, the darkness thickening, swallowing the faint remaining light. Hours passed unnoticed. The night stretched out, interminable and cold. Emma's sobs slowed, stilled, until a numb silence took root, a void in which hope and despair tangled in quiet stasis. The flickering candle guttered, casting a final wavering shadow before surrendering to the darkness. Emma remained rooted to the cold floor, a fragile figure encased in solitude, as the merciless storm beyond whispered promises of relentless night. The world had unraveled, and she stood at the fragile precipice, teetering on the edge of a void as deep and implacable as the forest itself. Darkness clung to the edges of Emma's small, solitary room, swallowing her world into a suffocating void. The cold night air seeped through a sliver beneath the curtains, brushing her skin like a breath from somewhere else distant, unfeeling, a reminder that warmth and safety were fragile, fleeting things. Outside, the forest stood mute and impenetrable, its dense silhouette blotting out the stars and swallowing the moon's pale light. Emma sat curled against the faded fabric of the armchair, her legs drawn close, arms wrapped tight around her knees. The only sound was the ragged intake of breath and the faint, painful beat of her heart struggling against the ice encasing it. Shadows fractured across the peeling wallpaper, these ghostly patterns mirroring the fracturing of her sense of self. The years of maternal strength, worn thin by relentless fear and whispered suspicions, collapsed inward like a fragile shell split by unseen forces. She touched the pendant resting at her chest, her mother's necklace, its cold metal a stark contrast to the barren ache within. Its weight, once a talisman of unconditional love, now felt like a brittle chain binding her to a past drenched in loss and unanswered questions. Her gaze fell to the worn stuffed toy lying abandoned on the floor, a witness to innocence eroded by creeping dread. Its fabric was dull, seams loosened, the eyes hollow. The toy conveyed the weight of all that she had desperately tried to shield, now slipping through her fingers, a tangible emblem of security lost. Outside, the silence pressed heavier with each passing second, a void filled with echoes of forgotten laughter and a child's second, haunting laugh, the sound that had shattered her sense of reality and grief. A solitary breath escaped her lips, soft, tentative, laced with despair. "Is this real?" she whispered, voice barely audible. The walls absorbed her words, offering no solace. Time twisted and stretched, losing definition, until even the steady ticking of the clock became a background murmur, melding with the distant rustle of wind-tossed branches. The weight of isolation pressed down, the space between her and the world beyond irreparably widening. Her eyes closed briefly, and in that moment, the room seemed to contract as if pulling the very air from her lungs and folding her into a shroud of silence and emptiness. When they opened again, they were glazed, reflecting the dim light of a cold world. The stuffed toy, the necklace, the shadows, all were witnesses to a soul barely holding on. The minutes bled into hours as Emma sat frozen in stillness, the fragile flame of her hope flickering and fading beneath waves of relentless night. Outside, the whisper of leaves softened to a hush, the night deepening its endless embrace. Emma's figure remained motionless, a solitary form perched on the brink, the weight of loss settling like dust, the fragility of all she cherished shattered beneath the weight of unforgiving silence. The night stretched like a heavy curtain over the world, thick and suffocating, softened only by the faintest gleam of moonlight piercing through ragged clouds. Emma sat motionless in the dimly lit living room, shadows pooling around her like silent witnesses. The room was cold, the window cracked open just enough to let a chill slip through, stirring dust motes in the faint light. Her fingers, trembling and raw, traced the worn fabric of the stuffed bear resting on her lap, a fragile relic tethered to childhood safety and the innocence now so grievously lost. Her eyes, glassy and haunted, remained fixed on the bear, as memories fluttered behind her closed lids, her child's laughter mingling with a second, distant echo, a laugh not quite right, lingering like a phantom in the silent spaces of her mind. The split between what was real and what was feared blurred, a suffocating mist that clouded her sense of self. The old necklace from her mother hung heavy around her neck, its silver coolness both comforting and cruel, a link to unconditional love that now sparked with the sting of vulnerability and regret. She tightened her grip around it, as if pulling herself back from the brink. The walls held their breath as a storm rumbled distant and low, its growl vibrating through the timbers and settling into the bones of the house. Outside, the wind scraped against the siding, whispering secrets Emma was only beginning to grasp. The rustling branches cast flickering shadows that writhed on the floor, like restless spirits testing the boundaries between light and dark. A fleeting memory surfaced, the uprooted toy caught in the woods, a disfigured symbol of lost security, tossed aside in a moment of chaos. It was a tangible piece of the nightmare enfolding her family, a reminder that some comforts were forever broken. Her breath hitched, hushed and uneven, a quiet plea barely uttered, "I'm still here." The room seemed to tilt, the suffocating weight briefly loosened by a fragile ember of life, a faint sound breaking through the oppressive silence. A creak, almost imperceptible, near the fireplace. Emma's head snapped up, eyes wide with the slender hope of a flicker in the dark. A soft rustle caught her attention, and there, tucked beneath a loose floorboard, was a small, weathered journal, its leather cover cracked but enduring. Hands unsteady, she pulled it free, the scent of old paper and ink a whisper from the past. The margins were filled with scrawled notes, cryptic and urgent, hinting at dangers faced and knowledge gathered about the woods surrounding their home. The promise of understanding, of answers long sought but feared, pulsed gently through the pages. Emma's lips curved in a faint, fragile smile, an ember-catching flame. The silence around her shifted, less daunting now, filled with the murmurs of possibilities and the slow pulse of courage reigniting in her chest. She closed the old journal softly, eyes alight with a new, tentative determination. Outside, the woods rustled, alive and waiting, but Emma stood tall against the dark, ready to face the shadows that had haunted her family for so long. The scene faded in gentle shadows and light, a quiet promise hanging in the air. From despair, the first breath of hope had begun. The dense forest, once looming like a grotesque shadow suffocating the edges of Emma's world, seemed softer now as dawn broke through the thick canopy. Sunlight filtered through the towering branches, splashing the mossy undergrowth with golden shards that glinted like scattered hope. The air was brisk, fresh with a promise she hadn't dared to imagine until now. Emma stood at the edge of a narrow trail, her breath forming pale clouds in the chill as she unfolded a worn notebook, its pages yellowed but alive with the scrawled words of someone who had walked these woods long before her. The journal, a forgotten artifact discovered hidden beneath a floorboard in her childhood home, was a key, a whisper from the past hinting at secrets buried deep within the very earth beneath her feet. Her fingers traced the faded ink, fingers trembling yet steadying with each familiar phrase. These were faint echoes of another time, an account of battles fought not just in the shadows of the woods, but within the essence of the community's collective fear. The author's reflections spoke of courage, the breaking of silence, and the strength found in confronting the darkest corners of doubt. The birdsong that mysteriously swelled around her was tentative but persistent, weaving melodies that pitched a delicate balance of fragility and resilience. It stirred the silence that clung to her thoughts, rupturing the long-held stillness with fragments of vibrant life. Emma's gaze fell to the ground where a delicate sprout broke through the fallen leaves, a cluster of green defying the decay. It seemed a living metaphor, fragile yet resolute, echoing the tentative stirrings within her own heart. Soft steps approached from behind, and Emma turned to see her partner, hesitation etched in his eyes but softened by a glimmer of understanding. No words were exchanged immediately. Instead, he offered the quiet solidarity of presence as they faced the morning light together. "Maybe it's time," Emma whispered, voice low but firm, "to stop running from what's waiting in the woods, and in ourselves." He nodded slowly, a silent accord woven between them, fragile but real. The path ahead was both literal and symbolic, a journey through tangled woods and tangled emotions, shadows giving way to light in unpredictable patterns. Emma took the first step onto the trail, the crunch of leaves beneath her boots sounding loud in the renewed stillness. Her child's stuffed bear peeked out from her backpack, a tender talisman from innocence slipping gently into hope. The woods, no longer merely an abyss of fear, seemed to bend toward Hera, a living entity that would test her courage but also cradle her awakening. As she moved deeper into the forest, the dappled sunlight shifted with the breeze, illuminating patches of earth worn by footsteps both old and new. Every breath Emma drew carried the weight of what had been lost and the fragile light of what might yet be found. At the heart of the woods, silence broke, a fleeting laughter, clear and bright, not alarming but inviting. It was the laugh of a child, innocent and joyful, entwined with a promise that truth, though hidden in shadows, was not beyond reach. Emma's lips curved in a tentative, hopeful smile, eyes reflecting a dawn of courage not yet complete but beginning. The forest around her whispered secrets, and she listened with a steady heart and the fragile strength of a mother's protective love guiding each step into the unknown. The forest's canopy was still mottled with sunlight, streaks of gold piercing the dense green shadows as Emma advanced with purposeful steps deeper into the woods. The thin path beneath her feet was softened by layers of fallen needles and moss, muffling her footsteps in a whispered hush. Her eyes wide, alert, scanned the shifting shapes, absorbing the fragile interplay between light and dark that danced like a heartbeat across the trees. Her breathing was measured but resolute, the echo of her child's laughter still reverberating faintly within her mind. It had become a ghostly beacon, both a haunting warning and a call to courage. The stuffed bear worn from countless embraces was tucked safely into her backpack, a symbol not only of lost innocence but of the fierce protection she now embodied. Ahead, the woods grew dense, the shadows thickening like ink pooling on parchment. Emma's heart quickened, but fear no longer seized her. It shaped her into something sharper, focused. Every breath was a defiant claim of ownership over her family's safety and her own sanity. Her hand brushed against a rough bark, grounding her in the tactile proof of life flourishing despite darkness. The trees whispered secrets in the rustle of leaves, ancient truths hidden beneath their gnarled roots. Emma felt not dread, but a fierce kinship with the forest, a living entity bound to her journey. Suddenly, a pale flutter caught her attention, a torn piece of fabric snagged on a branch, frayed and faded with a subtle familiarity. Emma stepped forward swiftly, pulling it free. It was a small fragment from the jacket her child wore days earlier. The air seemed to hold its breath as Emma clutched the piece close, the proof tangible, raw. Then, a noise, the crunch of leaves, light but deliberate, echoed ahead. Emma's gaze darted toward the source, eyes narrowing into determined focus. Unseen but palpably present, the force was near. "I'm not afraid anymore," she whispered to the woods, the words carrying the weight of every fear confronted and every loss endured. The forest responded with a quiet stillness, as if acknowledging her defiance. Emma moved on, guided by a pulse of intuition and courage. Her mind traced back to the journal she'd uncovered, its pages alive with patterns and clues left by those who faced this darkness before Heravan, when the path was fraught and victory uncertain. Breaking through a thicket, she found herself before a small clearing where sunlight streamed unhindered, warm and golden. The contrast with the surrounding gloom was stark, a natural arena where shadows could not hide. Here, Emma paused, the sunlight washing over her like liquid fire, infusing her with a potent clarity. The burden of past doubts and whispered dismissals peeled away, revealing a core of fierce resolve. Her hand lifted to the necklace resting against her heart, a steady rhythm syncing with the pulse of the earth beneath her feet. The symbol of love and protection was no longer a mere charm, but a rallying cry. A low, distant laughter second wafted through the trees, delicate and ethereal. This time, it trembled on the breeze rather than thrusting sharp like a blade. Emma's lips curved in a subtle, almost imperceptible smile. The presence in the woods was not defeated, but for the first time, it felt less like a looming terror and more like a riddle to be unraveled, a shadow to be met on equal terms. Turning away from the clearing, Emma's steps were lighter, her gaze steadier. She was no longer running from the unknown but engaging in its silent dialogue, a guardian entwined with the land and its mysteries. As the forest closed gently behind her, the sun dipped lower, turning leaves into flames of gold and crimson, a soft, symbolic blaze signaling a beginning forged from the darkest night. Emma's breath mingled with the cooling air as she moved forward, the powerful silence around her alive with possibility. The woods whispered on, secrets waiting, danger lurking, but now met with the radiant strength of a mother's unyielding love. The woods breathed around Emma, the heavy dusk light weaving through the tall trees and casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the undergrowth. But Emma stood resolute within this ancient cathedral of nature, a figure carved from determination, her stance steady beneath the fading sky. The relentless haunt of the unseen presence that had gripped her family's life for months now seemed to recoil beneath the quiet power glowing in her eyes. Her thoughts swirled as she reminisced on the long journey from whispered warnings drowned by laughter, through fearful nights and fractured trust, to this breath held in exalted stillness. The stuffed bear, once a symbol of lost innocence and fractured security, now nestled safely in her pack, its presence a reminder not of loss, but of the tenacity of love to endure even the darkest trials. A halo of last golden resplendence crowned the leaves and limbs above, and in the distance the faint, almost joyous echo of a second child's laughter rippled through the trees, not piercing like before, but as a gentle murmur of hope intertwined with memory. Emma reached down, fingers closing around a coarse, weathered journal unearthed earlier in the day, its pages brimming with scrawled revelations and insights into the very nature of the woods' mysteries. She breathed in the scent of old paper, a tangible connection to the past struggle that had shaped her awakening. "I see you now," she murmured into the encroaching silence, voice firm and unwavering. "You are no longer a shadow that controls my fear. This ends tonight." Her words hung heavy in the cool air, breaking like the first cracks in a frozen lake. The forest around her seemed to pulse with expectation, the wind weaving through the branches like an ethereal witness. She could feel the pulse of unseen life, the whispered rhythm of ancient secrets, yet beneath the primal unease ran a current of empowerment that she had never known before. As twilight surrendered to night, Emma's gaze steadied on a distant clearing, a stage upon which long-buried past and uncertain future were poised to collide. She stepped forward boldly, feet firm against the soft earth, carrying with her a fierce light born from the depths of maternal courage and personal reckoning. Her breath was measured, her senses heightened, every nerve alight with the intensity of a woman remade in the crucible of torment and resolve. Shadows no longer stretched to swallow her but danced around the edges, subdued by the radiant fire burning within. Emma paused at the edge of the clearing, the moon now full, spilling its silver glow and bathing the world in a celestial purity that seemed to cleanse and reveal simultaneously. She stood alone, yet unafraid, the protector of all she cherished, a sentinel between innocence and the encroaching dark. Her voice broke the stillness once more, soft but commanding. "I protect what cannot speak for itself. I face what no one else dares. This is my truth, my fight." The forest whispered back in quiet acknowledgement, and the distant echo of her child's laughter, a laughter not of fear but of joyful, did around her like a blessing. The camera pulled away slowly, capturing Emma's silhouette framed by the shifting light and shadow, a woman reborn into fierce love and unbreakable strength. The woods stirred gently in the night breeze, a mysterious realm still holding its secrets, yet knowing it had met an equal. The final image lingered, a mother standing at the brink, calm, unwavering, ready for all that must come, wrapped in the light of redemption and the quiet power of acceptance. The dawn broke softly over the sprawling garden, touching the earth with a gentle shimmer that seemed to breathe new life into the once turbulent landscape of Emma's soul. She sat quietly on the old wooden bench her mother had cherished, the early rays filtering through leaves that swayed like quiet sentinels of memory and hope. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of dew-damp grass and blooming jasmine, a delicate reminder that healing had begun. Her eyes, once clouded with worry and fear, now reflected a serene acceptance and understanding that some storms leave scars, but also teach resilience. The heavy shadows that had haunted her, unseen force within the woods, the whispers of her own doubt, had not been vanquished, but softened, transformed into faint echoes of a past she had chosen to face. The necklace from her mother rested lightly against her collarbone, its cool touch grounding her in the present moment. Its symbolism, unconditional love, enduring strength, had carried her through nights of despair and days of tentative hope. Now, it shimmered softly as a quiet testament to her growth. Across the garden, her child played at a distance, footsteps light and carefree, bathed in sunlight. Her smile was tender, a gentle reflection of the awakening peace within. Emma watched silently, her heart swelling with a quiet pride that came from embracing uncertainty instead of fleeing from it. The broken pieces of her past, the shadows of the woods, the doubts, the fears were no longer ominous, but part of the entire story she now accepted as her own. She reached out and gently brushed a blossom, its petals delicate yet resilient, a living mirror of her journey. In the quiet, she found clarity, her role as protector not just of her family's safety, but of her own fragile spirit. The mysterious whispers in the woods still lingered, subtle and distant, like a reminder that some shadows are meant to be understood, not conquered. The morning light grew warmer, casting a golden hue over everything, softening the edges of her realization. The forest outside continued its quiet rustle, alive and watchful, but no longer threatening, merely part of a larger, accepting universe. Emma turned her gaze to her child, their innocence a gentle anchor amid the whispers of woodland secrets. Her hand reached out, fingers lightly entwining with their small, warm one, this simple gesture a profound act of acceptance and love. The scene lingered, an image of quiet strength and tender surrender, a moment suspended in time where fear was acknowledged but no longer dominates. The woods rustled softly behind her, shadows flickering and blending into the morning's first light, a silent testament that some fears, though never fully erased, can be carried with grace. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking in the warmth, the promise of peace. The camera slowly pulled back, framing Emma's peaceful figure beside the vibrant life of her family, symbols of resilience and hope woven into a story finally finding its calm. The late afternoon sun cast a warm, amber glow over the tranquil garden, where Emma sat peacefully on the old wooden bench her mother once loved. The gentle rustling of leaves accompanied a moment of profound silence, a silence filled with unspoken forgiveness and acceptance. Her eyes, once filled with fear and suspicion, now shimmered with quiet resolve, reflecting a serenity that had inexorably taken root within her spirit. In her lap rested a small sapling, freshly planted into the earth, an act of symbolic rebirth, a living testament to resilience and renewal. Her fingers brushed the soil softly, the coolness beneath her fingertips grounding her in the present, in the love she had fought so fiercely to protect. The garden bloomed vibrantly around her, a lush tapestry of life and hope, each flower and leaf echoing her journey through darkness into light. The shadows of the woods behind her seemed to recede, their whispers softened, as if acknowledging her victory, an internal victory, rooted in forgiveness and understanding. Her gaze drifted skyward, catching the golden rays of sunset that bathed everything in a gentle glow. Her expression was calm, lips barely parted in a serene smile. The world outside still held its mysteries, the unseen shadows lurking in the woods, the echoes of past fears, but Emma's heart was no longer consumed by them. She reached out, her hand resting lightly on her child's shoulder, a symbol of maternal strength reaffirmed. The child looked up, eyes shining with innocence and love, unburdened by the shadows that once haunted their lives. The camera panned out slowly, capturing her silhouette against the luminous backdrop, an image of quiet triumph, embodied in a woman who had faced her deepest fears and chosen to forgive, to embrace what was and what could be. The last light faded, blending into the indigo of early evening. The gentle rustling of leaves persisted, a calming lullaby wrapped in the gentle acceptance of life's uncertainties. The scene lingered, an eternal moment of peace, where shadows became part of the landscape of love, resilience, and hope. The evening settled softly over the small town, a stillness that wrapped the neighborhood in a gentle embrace. Emma sat quietly in the backyard, the cool grass beneath her feet, watching her child play at the edge of the garden, on untroubled innocence now quietly restored. The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose, casting a warm glow that seemed to wash away the shadows of doubt and fear. Her gaze lingered on her child's carefree movements, a tender smile touching her lips as the faint rustle of leaves whispered lullabies of peace. The woods, once shrouded in menace, now seemed to breathe softly, the dark shadows retreating into the depths, surrendering to the serenity of the twilight. Emma's hand rested on her heart, a symbol of the fierce love that had carried her through the darkness. Her eyes, once haunted by shadows of the unknown, now reflected a profound calm, a quiet understanding that some fears would never fully vanish, but could be carried with grace and acceptance. She reached for the small stone she'd placed in her palm, a talisman of resilience and hope. Its cool surface was a reminder of her journey, a testament to the power of confronting the shadows within and without, and emerging with a fragile but unyielding strength. Across the garden, her child's laughter echoed softly, pure and unburdened, blending seamlessly with the gentle murmur of the evening breeze. Emma's heart swelled with a deep, quiet contentment. The chaos and the horrors had faded into the background, replaced by the warmth of love and the silent promise of a future built on resilience. As the last light flickered and disappeared behind the hills, the scene lingered an image of serenity, of a mother and child united in the quiet, sacred space of acceptance. The woods rustled gently in the distance, still, silent, and patient, an eternal reminder that some fears become part of the landscape of life, and in their acceptance, true peace is found. The camera slowly zoomed out, capturing the peaceful tableau, an enduring testament to hope, courage, and the unspoken bond that endures beyond shadows and fears. The silence stretched into eternity, a cinematic reflection that some truths lie quietly in the shadows, finally embraced. Ever heard something you couldn't explain? Share your story in the comments.